Cozy fantasy is the biggest trend in fantasy right now. Sometimes you don't want to read about bloody battles and war. You just want a witch in a bookshop, or an orc in a coffee shop, or a fae in a tea shop. In this video, I'm going to live my coziest fantasy lifestyle and try to find out, is cozy fantasy a welcome distraction from today's fast and busy world, or is it just making every fantasy story the same, shallow and formulaic? Let's grab a cup of tea and find out. First, I want to tell you that I am still obsessed with my new bookshelves. Now I can finally put all of my book of the month books very neatly together. They look perfectly next to each other on the shelf. And book of the month is also the sponsor of today's video. I think book of the month is the best way to discover new books and new and up and coming authors. Here's how it works. Every month, their team curates a list of the best new releases from new authors in all types of genres, and then you get to choose one that will be sent to your doorstep. That way you always have the best new thing to read and you're gonna be discovering new things. For this month, for example, I chose Count My Lies, which is a thriller, and I usually don't really read thrillers, so I probably would never have heard of this, but it was on the list and it is about someone scamming their way into a wealthy family, and I love scammer stories like that, so I think I might enjoy this. And I also picked an extra book. This is Our Infinite Fates. It was described as being similar to This Is How You Lose the Time War, and I love that book. So any other book about two lovers intertwined through different lifetimes, give it to me. It is always a joy every month to receive my book of the month books. I'm gonna put these with the other ones, although I think I might just immediately start reading this one. If you also always want to have something good to read, you can actually get your first book of the month book for only $9.99 in March if you use the code CLOVER. So click the link in my description and use the code CLOVER. Hello, welcome to another video. I thought, what better way to discuss the cozy fantasy genre than by trying to live like a cozy fantasy character for a few days and really bring the cozy fantasy vibe into my own life so I can escape the demons in my mind. And to start that, we're gonna do the coziest of all cozy things. I'm gonna bake bread. I've been really into making focaccias lately. Did they fail the first 5 times? Yes, but last time it worked, so I'm hoping it works again today. We will find out. Let me give you a little bit of history on what cozy fantasy actually is. I think the first time something was called cozy fantasy was with the release of the book Legends and Lattes in 2022 by Travis Baldree. It was first published by Cryptid Press, which I honestly couldn't find anything about. So I'm assuming it's like a small press or a self-publishing thing, but about half a year later, due to its success, it was already picked up by Tor. The concept of Legends and Lattes is what spoke to a lot of people because it was so different from most other fantasies at the time. There were no big wars or chosen ones. I'm just making a regular yeast bread, by the way. Anyway, there were no big wars or torture or violence, but instead we follow a barbarian orc who is done with all of her questing and now dreams of starting a coffee shop in the fantasy realm. And the whole book is just about her setting up this coffee shop and introducing the concept of coffee and lattes and cinnamon rolls to all the elves and dwarves and bards in the vicinity. I read it and like the biggest, scariest thing that happens there is that they have to deal with their taxes. Just checking if my yeast's alive. She's bubbling and alive. Love that for her. The interesting thing about this book is also the author, Travis Baldry. Before he started writing, he made fantasy games and he also was an audiobook narrator. And what he says, I have the book right here, there's an interview with him at the back of it, and he explains how he got the idea for Legends and Lattes. He says that because he was an audiobook narrator, he mostly narrated books with like male protagonists, and there was like world-ending threats, high drama. He says, during the height of COVID, I told some friends that I wished I could read a Hallmark Channel story set in the Forgotten Realms. I was definitely missing a neighborhood coffee shop at the time too. Seeing other human beings and chatting over a cup seemed like the height of escapist fantasy to me. Like, fantasy has always been escapist, and it makes sense that especially during the pandemic, like the biggest escapist fantasy was just talking to a fellow human and sitting in a cafe. And if you look at the Google Trends for cozy fantasy, it has definitely become more and more popular over the past 3 years. And you can also see that it tends to go together with searches for things like cozy games and cozy Switch games, because I really remember that in 2020 when everyone was playing Animal Crossing, cozy games also became a big thing. So games that weren't about like big wars and like fighting, but also had a more slow, cozy community element to them, like Animal Crossing or Cozy Grove or Stardew Valley. I think we can all understand that these genres became popular during the pandemic, but I think even nowadays, the idea of community in a coffee shop and talking to your friends is still an escapist fantasy. The world is on fire, groceries are getting more expensive, there's a housing crisis, and wages are not going up. Everyone is stressed, burned out, high anxiety. It is no surprise that cozy fantasy is really big right now. For the longest time, we've had this trend in fantasy that was very Game of Thrones-esque, you know, wars and torture and rape and just grim, dark themes. But it makes total sense that nowadays people want to escape with themes of shops and community, slowing down, being peaceful. And that is something that cozy fantasy provides. Okay, I know that I'm baking bread because it's supposed to be like really peaceful, but I'm always like stressed because I'm like, I don't know if this is, I think this dough is too wet, but I also know that focaccia is supposed to be wet, so I don't know. I guess we'll just let it proof and see if it works. It's always a question whenever I bake bread. Will it work? Will the dough rise? Will it turn into a flat piece of brick? I'm gonna throw on the towel and I'm gonna let it proof. I've definitely read my fair share of cozy fantasy books, but they tend to be hit or miss for me. My favorite ones are Howl's Moving Castle and the Emily Wilde books. But just generally for cozy fantasy, it seems that some people absolutely love it and other people just can't seem to get into it. Like me, I really tend to struggle with most cozy fantasies. I asked you guys on Instagram to let me know why you like cozy fantasy or why you dislike it, so I thought it would be interesting to share the results of that question. Time to break out the whiteboard, guys. Did you miss her? So one of the first most often mentioned reasons for why people don't like the cozy fantasy genre is that it's not challenging enough. Cozy fantasy books tend to be seen as just a bit shallow, but one of the reasons that many people said that they liked the cozy fantasy genre, it's exactly because these books are not challenging. People like to have a little bit of a palate cleanser in between big books, or after a long day of work they just want to sit down and read a book that doesn't require too much thinking. It is pure escapism. And you'll see that most of the reasons why people like cozy fantasy are also exactly the reasons why other people don't like cozy fantasy. For example, people love it because it is calming. They say these books are comforting, anti-stress. Whereas a common reason to not like cozy fantasy, which includes me, is that the stakes are too low. There isn't enough happening to keep you interesting. It's too comforting, too calming. Fans say that it's great for beginner fantasy readers, or if you're just not in a mood for a fantasy with like tons of names and intricate world building. Whereas world building fans tend to not really like cozy fantasy because the lack of world building that usually exists in these books. And because of the lack of plot, a lot of people find cozy fantasy boring. What tends to happen to me is that I really enjoy cozy fantasy at the beginning when you're getting to know the characters and the world that you're in, and then the rest of the book I find it too boring because there's not a lot of plot, no stakes, not enough happening. But what I found really funny is that a lot of you guys said that you actually like cozy fantasy because it is boring. And sometimes it is good to be bored. Cozy fantasy tends to be more lighthearted, more hopeful about humanity. There's not as much violence as in epic fantasy, making these books less triggering for a lot of people. I think it's sad that for a long time, the idea for like a good, like well thought out historical fantasy just meant that there needed to be like a ton of violence, and usually violence against women. So I totally understand that people are like, I just want to read a fantasy book where the most difficult thing that happens is that a dragon goes missing, or the coffee is too bitter. This is all just a lot more comforting. But one of the main reasons, one of the biggest things that people said why they didn't like cozy fantasy, and that is also the reason I tend to not like it, it tends to be very formulaic. A lot of cozy fantasies have become pretty similar. You can guess exactly what is going to happen. There's always some kind of coffee shop or tea shop or a bookshop, the quirky best friend. It follows exactly your typical 3-act story structure. Most of the characters are typical character archetypes that you've seen many times before. It makes it feel too mass produced. And what a lot of people said that didn't like cozy fantasy is that they only like some of it if it's like genuinely well written. Personally, I also find most cozy fantasy books just not very well written, but the ones that I do like House Moving Castle, Emily Wilde, I really like because the characters were so well thought out. They really spoke to me. I think that these authors have very strong writing styles, very strong voices, are good at creating quirky atmospheres. These stories feel original to me, and that's why I enjoy them. But the biggest complaint that people tend to have about cozy fantasy is that most of it feels like a formulaic copy of each other. And you know, formulas can be comforting. It's one of the reasons why people like cozy fantasy so much, is there is comfort in knowing what's going to happen. There is comfort in seeing a story that you are familiar with. I do, however, disagree with one of the common ideas, and that is that cozy fantasy is never challenging. I disagree. Oh. It is time to it is time to fold our dough. Let's not forget about our dough, guys. I think this imagining of a cozy other world can be a very challenging subject, especially in today's day and age. In our current consumerist capitalistic hellscape, being cozy and calm and focused on your community and being relaxed is actually quite the challenge. And imagining a realm or a fantasy world where this is the norm, I think is actually like an interesting philosophical question, which is why I love Becky Chambers. I would consider A Psalm for the Wild Build and its sequel cozy sci-fi. It is about a monk who serves tea to people and a robot that lives in the woods, meeting and having conversations with each other about what society looks like or should look like. They ask themselves, what do humans need, and have conversations about what it means to help each other or overcoming their differences as a human and a robot. We don't have much in common, except a need to share food. A cup of tea may not be the most important thing in the world, or a steam bath, or a pretty garden. They're so superfluous in the grand scheme of things, but the people who did actually important work, building, feeding, teaching, healing, they all came to the shrine of these little comforts, as it was the little nudge that helped them to get the important things done. So enjoy your cup of tea. It is enough to exist in a world and marvel at it. You're allowed to just live. That is all most animals do. You are an animal, and animals have no purpose. Nothing has a purpose. The world simply is. And one of my favorite quotes from the book, do you not find consciousness alone to be the most exhilarating thing? This series is a great example of how you can write something optimistic and cozy and peaceful and hopeful that is also making you think about something, because this optimistic and hopeful and cozy life is very different from our current society. So it does give you something to think about. What would a perfectly cozy and hopeful and peaceful society look like? Guys, I completely forgot about my bread. I mean, it looks fine. I'm sure it's completely overproofed right now. This is really stupid. Let's see if it dimples at all. Oh, okay, well. No, actually, it looks surprisingly good, but that is some dry and unsalty bread. Oh no, now this video no longer fits like the cozy cute vibes because the bread kind of filled. But you know, this is why it makes me sad that a lot of these cozy fantasies and just the concept of cozy fantasy, cozy games, cozy content has become such a formula. This idea of coziness has become such a trend that we see it everywhere in every type of content, not just cozy fantasy, but there's also cozy crime, there's cozy games for you to relax. There's so much cozy content on the internet, people living cottagecore lives, tradwife content, like homesteading content. I think all of that fits our general trend towards like cozy, homey content, escapist content. And it's gotten to a point where we have commodified and mass-produced the idea of escaping mass production. It's basically what I've done with this video for you guys. I romanticized and cozified my life to turn it into content for you to consume on your phone or laptop or whatever it is that you're currently watching this video on. You are living a cozy lifestyle vicariously through me but are you actually also doing it yourself? And that's the disappointing thing, right? Like for most people, it is hard to live this kind of cozy lifestyle, making things from scratch yourself, going out to little cafes and having your own bookshops. Like that is a lifestyle that is pretty inaccessible to most people nowadays because of how the world is. For me, making videos like this is my job, so I can take time out of my day to bake bread so I can film it. There's no tea in this mug because I already drank it this morning. Every content creator that makes like cozy content, cottagecore content, has the time to do those things because it's their job. But it's just an idea. And there's so many stories and books and games and content out there that sells us this idea of coziness and peace and community, and we are all consuming that individually on our phones in our own homes, quickly taking it in between the stressors of real life. And this is not me hating on cozy content or cozy fantasy or cozy games, because clearly I love all of those things. But sometimes I spend a really long time watching reels of people living their cottagecore, Ghibli-esque lifestyle, and then suddenly I realize I just spent an hour sitting on my couch watching videos on my phone, and I think to myself, what the hell am I doing? I just think there's something sad about the fact that we all clearly crave this kind of escapist fantasy of a cozy, slow, community-filled life. But the only way that we can get there is by consuming things about that instead of actually building it for ourselves. So what to do? Well, honestly, I think that reading cozy fantasy books, or any books, and taking time of your day to read a book is you're already way on your way there. That's definitely something a cozy fantasy character would do. And I know that in our busy lives, it can be really hard to make time for these cozy things. Like you can't just open up a coffee shop or spend your entire morning breaking bread from scratch. But I think there are other things that we can do. One of my favorite trends on the internet right now is where people ask the audience, what do you do? Little things that you do to whimsify your life. I tell my dishes it's bath time.
I have Antarctica pinned on the weather app to check on the penguins every day.
Oh, so cute.
I say, may I take your coats while I'm peeling garlic?
So cute. I paint on the shells of garden snails so I know when I have a repeat visitor. Amazing. I recently saw someone say that they put on candlelight when they shower, and I did that, and it was the most magical shower experience I've ever had. Anyway, in the spirit of embodying the cozy fantasy lifestyle, I'm going to take this focaccia bread to my friends Leora and Nina so we can have it for lunch. And I made them lunch. I made them a bread and I shared it.
Ja, my cookies!
Hij is een beetje verbrand, maar hij staat nog wel. You're such a little kitchen angel!
I love to bake. I bake a lot of bread and I made cookies. And I feel like in general making things with your hands is something that's really comforting and cozy to me. Like I crochet a lot, and being able to like do something with your hands and then creating something from that, whether that's edible or crochet or ceramics or something, is very cozy to me.
I guess by decorating my house in a cozy vibe. I like decorating my bookshelves and having seasonal decor.
Your bookshelves are gorgeous. I love your bookshelves. Follow her on Instagram and TikTok to see her bookshelves.
I think for me, I have a really big imagination, and I've always had a really big imagination, and as a child I would get told off about it. They'd be like, you have to live in the real world. And I really enjoy now as an adult, like, not living in the real world. Like, when I go to a fantasy market, I like low-key pretend it's an actual fantasy market, and I put my house full of weird whimsical things like mushrooms and like little snails with mushrooms growing out of them and more mushrooms that light up. And I think that's wonderful. And I also like to dress a little bit fantasy whenever I get the chance, like corsets and stuff. And also, I have one more thing. Enjoying the little things and like your own life. It's kind of the same thing, and it's so nice. It makes everything better. I do always point at like my coats and stuff. I'm like, when I put them like on something and they might fall off, I'm always like, guys,
I talk to my cat. Is that could be
very whimsical.
Very
whimsical. I do like have full conversations with my cat, and like I feel like my cat is very whimsical. He has his own little life. I do think you like spend a lot of time looking at like small mushrooms in the wild or like little flowers, notice them and appreciate them.
It's like noticing the little things.
I'm a big noticer,
Yeah,
guys.
I love noticing the little things.
Big little things fan right here.
I wanted to share like little things that I do to kind of bring the cozy vibe, the whimsy vibe into my own life. Well, first off, I like to make things from scratch, like baking bread and sharing it with my friends. Whenever I have guests over, I always make sure to burn a scented candle in the hallway so that the hallway smells really nice when they come into the home. I'm also a big fan of skipping, like instead of running or walking, doing a little skip. Ooh, just really hits the spot. What else do I do? A big fan of noticing the weeds, like the little plants in between the pavement, especially if you live in a city. It might feel like there's no nature around, but nature is always around. You just have to look for it. Oh, when I go for a run, I like to listen to fantasy music playlists so I can feel like a main character training to kill the king, you know? Really helps. Really helps. I also always say hi to the spiders in my house. They keep the insects away. I'm grateful for them. And I always try to make sure to say hi to everyone that lives in my apartment building, even if I don't know who they are. Anyway, I want to know your guys' things. What are some things that you do to bring some whimsy, some cozy fantasy into your life? Because I would love to be able to scroll through the comments and see like more little examples of this. Makes me really happy. I'm going to end this video with a big thank you to all of my patrons and a special shout out to all of my elite Patreon members whose names you can see here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Goodbye.